They called her military tattoos cosplay ink and snickered when she mentioned her deployment stories, convinced that 26-year-old Maya Chen was just another millennial trying to look tough with fake military credentials. The marketing executives at Preston Associates had no idea they were mocking a decorated Army Ranger who had survived 3 combat tours in Afghanistan and earned a Purple Heart for actions that remained classified. But when a devastating earthquake trapped their entire corporate retreat in a collapsed mountain resort, this wannabe soldier was about to remind everyone that some people don't just play dress up with heroism, they live it every single day. What happened next would silence every smirk, humble every doubter, and prove that the most dangerous mistake you can make is underestimating someone whose scars tell stories you're not brave enough to hear. Creating these powerful stories of hidden strength takes tremendous research and dedication. So if you're finding inspiration in this tale of ultimate vindication, please consider subscribing to our channel for more incredible stories of overlooked heroes. Maya Chen adjusted her blazer sleeve as she walked through the gleaming lobby of Preston Associates, one of Seattle's most prestigious marketing firms, where she had worked as a senior account manager for 8 months. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the bustling workspace where young professionals clutched their artisanal coffee cups and discussed weekend plans that revolved around hiking trails they'd never actually completed and CrossFit workouts that barely challenged them. At 26, Maya carried herself with a posture that seemed unnaturally straight to her colleagues, a bearing that suggested military precision rather than the casual confidence typical of corporate millennials. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a regulation-perfect bun, and her clothing choices favored structured blazers and conservative colors that covered the intricate tattoo work covering her arms and torso. Most of her co-workers had only glimpsed fragments of the artwork during rare moments when her sleeves rolled up or her collar shifted, revealing portions of what appeared to be elaborate, military-themed designs. The tattoos had become a source of ongoing speculation and barely concealed mockery among the Preston Associates staff. During lunch breaks in the company cafeteria, conversations would inevitably drift toward Maya's military phase and the authenticity of her ink. The general consensus among her colleagues was that she had gotten the tattoos to cultivate an edgy image, possibly inspired by popular military-themed video games or action movies that romanticized combat experience. Jessica Winters, the firm's 28-year-old creative director and unofficial social coordinator, had become the most vocal skeptic of Maya's military background. Jessica had graduated from Northwestern University with a communications degree and an internship at a Chicago advertising agency, credentials that she leveraged into her current position through networking and social media savvy. Her experience with military culture was limited to watching war movies and dating a guy who had considered joining the National Guard before deciding that college was a better option. "I mean, look at her," Jessica would whisper to her lunch companions, gesturing discreetly toward Maya's table where she typically sat alone, reviewing client files while eating a precisely portioned meal that looked suspiciously like military rations. The whole military thing is obviously an act. She probably spent a weekend at some tactical training camp and decided to build her entire personality around it. Those tattoos are way too clean and artistic to be real military ink. Maya's supposed military service had become a running joke among the younger staff members, who viewed her disciplined habits and formal communication style as an elaborate performance designed to seem more interesting than the typical marketing professional. They mocked her habit of arriving at the office exactly 15 minutes early every day, her tendency to organize her workspace with geometric precision, and her practice of addressing senior executives with a level of respectful formality that seemed excessive in the company's deliberately casual corporate culture. The skepticism extended beyond her professional demeanor to her physical capabilities. During the company's quarterly team-building exercises, Maya's athletic performance had raised eyebrows and generated more speculation about her alleged military background. While her colleagues struggled through basic obstacle courses and complained about minor physical challenges, Maya completed every exercise with efficiency that suggested serious training. Her endurance during hiking excursions exceeded that of coworkers who spent significant money on personal trainers and boutique fitness classes. "She's probably just naturally athletic," explained Brad Morrison, a 29-year-old account executive who had played Division III college soccer and considered himself the office fitness expert. "Some people are born with good coordination and stamina. Doesn't mean she was actually in the army or whatever she claims. Besides, look at her, she's way too put together to have been crawling through mud in some Middle Eastern desert." Maya's workspace reflected the same precise organization that characterized her personal habits. Her desk contained exactly the items necessary for daily operations: a laptop positioned at a specific angle, client folders arranged in alphabetical order, pens organized by color and function, and a single family photograph showing her with her parents outside their family restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown. The military precision of her workspace organization was attributed by colleagues to obsessive-compulsive tendencies rather than ingrained training habits. Her communication style further reinforced her colleagues' perception that she was performing military authenticity rather than expressing genuine experience. Maya spoke in complete sentences with grammatical precision that seemed formal compared to the casual speech patterns typical of her generation. She rarely used corporate jargon or millennial slang, instead choosing words with careful deliberation that suggested someone accustomed to precise verbal communication. When discussing project timelines or client requirements, she used terminology that sounded vaguely military but could have been learned from television shows or military-themed PODCASTS. The company's Human Resources Department had reviewed Maya's employment application and background check, which listed previous work experience at a Veteran Employment Assistance Program and volunteer work with military family support organizations. However, the HR staff interpreted this background as evidence of Maya's interest in military culture, rather than confirmation of actual service. The assumption was that she had developed fascination with military life through volunteer work and had gradually adopted military mannerisms and appearance to align with her interests. Maya's apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill district reflected the same military precision that characterized her professional workspace. The studio apartment was furnished with minimal, functional pieces arranged with geometric precision. Her clothing hung in the closet organized by color and season, with each garment spaced exactly 2 inches apart. Military-style boots were lined up near the entrance with the precision of a barracks inspection, and her kitchen contained nothing beyond the basic appliances and utensils necessary for preparing simple, nutritious meals. The apartment's most distinctive feature was a locked footlocker positioned beneath the window, painted military green and secured with a combination lock that Maya had never opened in the presence of visitors. Neighbors occasionally speculated about the footlocker's contents, assuming it contained costume accessories or memorabilia related to her military interest. The building's maintenance staff had noticed that Maya's apartment was always maintained to standards that exceeded typical rental unit cleanliness, with everything organized according to what appeared to be military inspection protocols. Maya's social life outside work remained largely private, contributing to her colleagues' speculation about her background and interests. She rarely participated in after-work activities or company social events, preferring to maintain professional boundaries that her coworkers interpreted as antisocial behavior. When she did attend mandatory company functions, she typically arrived precisely on time, participated in required activities with professional courtesy, and departed at the earliest appropriate moment. Her weekend activities were equally mysterious to colleagues, who occasionally spotted her around Seattle wearing athletic clothing that looked more functional than fashionable. She had been seen entering and leaving a gym that specialized in functional fitness and martial arts training, facilities that attracted serious athletes rather than casual fitness enthusiasts. Her workout clothing bore no logos or brands, consisting instead of plain military-style garments that suggested either authentic military issue or careful attention to realistic costuming. The Preston and Associates staff had developed elaborate theories about Maya's background, with most settling on the explanation that she was an enthusiastic military culture fan who had invested significant time and money into creating an authentic-appearing military persona. The consensus was that her disciplined habits, physical fitness, and military-style tattoos represented an elaborate form of cosplay that she had extended into her professional life to distinguish herself from other marketing professionals. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya's actual military service record remained completely unknown to her civilian colleagues, who had never thought to question their assumptions about her background with any seriousness. The elaborate military tattoos that covered her arms and torso told stories of combat operations, unit deployments, and commendations that her co-workers couldn't read because they had never learned the symbolic language of military culture. Each piece of ink represented specific achievements, locations, and experiences that would have commanded respect from anyone familiar with military service recognition systems. The upcoming corporate retreat to Cascade Mountain Resort represented Preston and Associates' most ambitious team-building event, designed to strengthen workplace relationships while providing recreational activities in a luxury mountain setting. Maya had initially requested to skip the retreat, citing personal obligations, but company policy required attendance from all senior staff members. The mandatory nature of the retreat meant that Maya would spend 3 days in close proximity to colleagues whose skepticism about her background had become an ongoing source of workplace tension. As Maya packed her luggage for the mountain retreat, she included items that her colleagues would interpret as evidence of her military obsession: precisely folded clothing, emergency supplies that seemed excessive for a luxury resort weekend, and a first aid kit that appeared more comprehensive than necessary for recreational activities. Her packing methodology followed military protocols that ensured efficient use of space and immediate access to essential items, habits that her co-workers would view as further confirmation of her elaborate military role-playing. The irony that Maya's colleagues couldn't appreciate was that their skepticism about her military background had created a workplace environment where her actual combat experience and specialized training were completely dismissed as performance art. The same people who mocked her discipline and questioned her authenticity were about to find themselves in a crisis situation where her genuine military expertise would become the difference between life and death for everyone involved. Maya's first day at Preston and Associates had begun 8 months earlier with a background that would have impressed any reasonable employer, but her credentials were filtered through assumptions that transformed genuine military achievement into suspected fabrication. Her resume listed 3 years of active duty service with the 75th Ranger Regiment, multiple combat deployments to Afghanistan, and specialized training in emergency response and crisis management. However, the hiring committee interpreted these qualifications through the lens of their preconceptions about what a female veteran should look like and how military experience should be presented. During her initial interview, Maya had answered questions about her military service with the measured precision that characterized all her professional communications. She described her role in combat operations using carefully chosen language that conveyed essential information without revealing classified details or traumatic experiences that civilian employers wouldn't understand. Her responses demonstrated extensive knowledge of military protocols, international conflict zones, and leadership responsibilities that exceeded typical entry-level experience in any field. The interview panel, consisting of 3 Preston and Associates, executives with no military background, had listened to Maya's responses with polite skepticism that they disguised as professional interest. Her military experience sounded impressive, but somehow too comprehensive for someone her age, leading them to conclude that she was either exaggerating her responsibilities or had served in support roles that she was presenting as combat positions. The assumption was that her actual military service had been limited to administrative duties that she was enhancing to appear more qualified for civilian employment. Maya's references from military supervisors and veteran employment organizations provided glowing recommendations that praised her leadership abilities, technical expertise, and exceptional performance under pressure. However, the Civilian Hiring Committee interpreted these references as evidence of military culture's tendency to inflate accomplishments and provide mutual support among veterans seeking employment. They assumed that military references were inherently biased and less reliable than recommendations from civilian employers who understood corporate performance standards. The decision to hire Maya had been based primarily on her marketing education and internship experience rather than her military background, which the company viewed as largely irrelevant to advertising industry requirements. Her bachelor's degree in communications from San Francisco State University and her internship at a Bay Area marketing firm provided credentials that the hiring committee understood and valued. The military service was treated as an interesting biographical detail that might appeal to clients seeking authenticity in their marketing campaigns. Maya's first week at Preston Associates had revealed the extent to which her military background would be misunderstood and dismissed by civilian colleagues. Her habit of arriving early and staying late was interpreted as insecurity about her qualifications rather than ingrained discipline from military training. Her methodical approach to project planning was viewed as inflexibility rather than strategic thinking developed through combat operations where poor planning could result in casualties. The company's open office environment had initially challenged Maya's adjustment to civilian workplace culture, where personal conversations, music, and casual interruptions created constant distractions that interfered with focused work. Her preference for quiet, organized workspace contradicted the firm's deliberately collaborative atmosphere, where spontaneous brainstorming sessions and informal discussions were encouraged as creativity-enhancing practices. Maya's need for structured work environment was characterized by supervisors as resistance to team collaboration rather than learned behavior from military operations where discipline and focus were essential for survival. Her project management style reflected military training that emphasized clear objectives, defined timelines, and contingency planning for potential problems. Maya approached client campaigns with systematic analysis that identified potential obstacles and developed alternative strategies before problems could derail project success. Her thoroughness and attention to detail exceeded company standards, but was sometimes criticized as over-preparation that delayed creative processes and limited spontaneous innovation. The complexity of Maya's actual military service became apparent through subtle details that her civilian colleagues noticed but consistently misinterpreted. Her knowledge of international geography and political situations reflected firsthand experience in conflict zones rather than academic study or news consumption. She could discuss Middle Eastern cultural practices, regional dialects, and local customs with accuracy that suggested extensive personal exposure rather than theoretical learning from books or documentaries. Maya's physical fitness routine maintained capabilities that far exceeded typical civilian exercise regimens, though she carefully concealed the extent of her training from co-workers who already questioned her military authenticity. Her morning workouts began at 0500 hours with cardiovascular conditioning that would challenge professional athletes, followed by strength training that maintained muscle groups essential for carrying military equipment over extended distances. Her diet consisted of carefully calculated nutrition that sustained optimal physical performance rather than the casual eating habits typical of office workers. The martial arts training that Maya continued at a local facility focused on combat techniques rather than recreational self-defense classes popular among young professionals. Her instructor, a former Marine Corps combat veteran, recognized her military background immediately and provided advanced training that maintained her hand-to-hand combat skills at operational levels. The other students at the facility assumed Maya was an enthusiastic civilian student with natural athletic ability rather than a combat veteran maintaining essential survival skills. Maya's apartment building neighbors had observed her disciplined lifestyle without understanding its military origins. Her daily routine followed precise schedules that never varied regardless of weather conditions or social obligations. She maintained physical fitness standards that required significant time investment and personal sacrifice, characteristics that neighbors attributed to vanity or obsessive personality traits rather than military discipline that had become essential to her identity. The locked footlocker in Maya's apartment contained military equipment and personal items that would have immediately validated her service record to anyone familiar with military culture. Inside were combat boots worn during multiple deployments, uniform items bearing unit insignia and combat patches, photographs from overseas operations, and commendations that documented her exceptional service record. The footlocker also contained personal letters from fellow soldiers, maps of areas where she had conducted operations, and equipment that remained classified for security purposes. Maya's reluctance to discuss her military service in detail reflected both operational security protocols and personal trauma that civilian colleagues couldn't appreciate. Her combat experiences included events that remained too sensitive for casual workplace conversation, involving life and death decisions and exposure to violence that would be inappropriate to share with people whose greatest workplace stress involved missed deadlines and difficult clients. The gap between her actual experience and her coworkers' assumptions created an isolation that made meaningful professional relationships virtually impossible. The Preston and Associates social dynamic had established Maya as an outsider whose military background was treated as an affectation rather than genuine life experience. Company parties and informal gatherings included conversations about military topics where colleagues would make uninformed comments about veteran issues while assuming Maya's input was based on research rather than personal experience. She learned to remain silent during these discussions to avoid confrontations that would only reinforce her reputation as someone taking military role-playing too seriously. Maya's supervisor, David Richardson, was a 34-year-old marketing director who had built his career through creative campaigns and client relationship management. His understanding of military culture was limited to Hollywood representations and news coverage of overseas conflicts that he followed with casual interest. Richardson appreciated Maya's work quality and professional reliability, but considered her military background largely irrelevant to marketing industry success. He viewed her disciplined approach as beneficial for project management, but unnecessary for creative development. The annual performance review process had revealed the institutional bias that shaped how Maya's military experience was evaluated within corporate culture. Her exceptional organizational skills, ability to work under pressure, and leadership capabilities during crisis situations were acknowledged but not connected to her military training. Instead, these qualities were attributed to personal characteristics that would have developed regardless of her background, effectively dismissing the value of military experience for civilian employment. Maya's client interactions demonstrated communication skills and cultural sensitivity that reflected international experience and cross-cultural training from military deployments. She could work effectively with clients from diverse backgrounds and navigate complex political situations that challenged other account managers. However, Her success with international clients was attributed to her Asian American heritage rather than her extensive experience working with foreign populations. During military operations overseas, the company's diversity and inclusion initiatives included veteran hiring goals and workplace policies designed to support military families. But the actual implementation of these programs revealed limited understanding of veteran needs and experiences. Maya had been counted as a diversity hire that fulfilled veteran employment targets, but her workplace integration reflected the same assumptions and biases that characterized civilian attitudes toward military service in general. Maya's continuing education efforts included professional development courses and industry certifications that enhanced her marketing expertise while maintaining connections to veteran support organizations. She volunteered with programs that helped transitioning military personnel adapt to civilian employment, sharing her experience navigating corporate culture while maintaining military identity. Her volunteer work provided the meaningful connections with fellow veterans that were impossible to achieve in her civilian workplace environment. The upcoming corporate retreat represented both an opportunity and a challenge for Iker. Maya's integration into Preston and Associates culture. The 3-day event would require extended social interaction with colleagues whose skepticism about her background had become a constant source of workplace tension. Maya had requested permission to skip the retreat, but was informed that attendance was mandatory for all senior staff members. Regardless of personal preferences or scheduling conflicts, Maya's preparation for the mountain retreat followed military protocols that ensured readiness for unexpected situations and emergency circumstances. Her packing list included items that her colleagues would interpret as evidence of her military obsession, but were actually standard emergency supplies that her training required her to maintain. The comprehensive first aid kit, emergency communication devices, and survival equipment represented genuine preparedness rather than theatrical props designed to enhance her military image. Cascade Mountain Resort represented everything that corporate America considered the pinnacle of executive retreat experiences. A luxury facility nestled in the Washington Cascades where technology executives and marketing professionals could escape their urban environments while remaining connected to the digital infrastructure that defined their professional identities. The resort's marketing materials emphasized its commitment to providing modern amenities in a pristine natural setting. With high-speed internet, conference facilities equipped with the latest presentation technology, and accommodations that rivaled 5-star urban hotels, the resort's management philosophy reflected Silicon Valley's approach to work-life integration, where professional development activities were seamlessly blended with recreational experiences designed to enhance creativity and team bonding. The facility featured climbing walls with automated safety systems, hiking trails marked with QR codes that provided real-time navigation assistance, and outdoor adventure activities managed by certified guides who specialized in corporate team building exercises rather than wilderness survival training. Preston Associates had selected Cascade Mountain Resort for their annual corporate retreat, specifically because of its reputation for hosting successful technology company events and its ability to accommodate groups seeking sophisticated amenities combined with outdoor adventure experiences. The 3-day program included professional development workshops, strategic planning sessions, and recreational activities designed to strengthen workplace relationships, while providing networking opportunities that could advance individual careers. Maya arrived at the resort driving her own vehicle, a reliable but unremarkable SUV that contrasted sharply with the luxury cars and rental vehicles favored by her colleagues. Her luggage consisted of a single military-style duffel bag and a backpack that appeared designed for serious outdoor activities rather than weekend resort stays. The efficient packing reflected space utilization techniques learned during military deployments where equipment weight and volume were Critical factors in operational planning. The resort's check-in process revealed the digital dependence that characterized modern hospitality management, with guests required to download mobile applications that controlled room access, restaurant reservations, and activity scheduling. Maya completed the digital registration with the same methodical approach she applied to all administrative tasks, though she also carried physical backup documentation and emergency contact information that her colleagues would consider unnecessarily paranoid for a domestic corporate retreat. The welcome reception took place in the resort's main lodge, a spectacular timber frame building with floor-to-ceiling windows that provided panoramic views of the surrounding mountain peaks. The atmosphere was carefully crafted to suggest rustic authenticity while providing urban comfort levels, with furniture that appeared handcrafted but was actually manufactured to hospitality industry durability standards. The lighting system could be adjusted to simulate natural conditions throughout the day, ensuring optimal ambiance for professional presentations and social activities. Maya's arrival at the reception generated the familiar pattern of colleague interactions that had characterized her 8 months at Preston Associates. She greeted everyone with professional courtesy while maintaining the personal boundaries that protected her from workplace drama and speculation about her background. Her clothing choices for the retreat reflected the same conservative professionalism that concealed her tattoos and military bearing behind acceptable corporate appearance standards. Jessica Winters had organized the evening's icebreaker activities with the enthusiasm of someone whose event planning experience was limited to college parties and urban networking events. The games were designed to encourage personal sharing and team bonding through activities that revealed interesting biographical details about participants. Jessica's assumption was that 3 days of close proximity would finally expose Maya's military persona as elaborate fiction, when she couldn't maintain the performance under extended scrutiny. The icebreaker questions included prompts about childhood memories, travel experiences, and personal achievements that participants were encouraged to share with the group. Maya responded to these queries with the same measured precision that characterized all her professional communications, providing information that was technically accurate while avoiding details that would reveal the true extent of her military experience or the classified nature of many her overseas operations. Brad Morrison, who had positioned himself as the retreat's unofficial fitness coordinator, announced plans for morning hiking excursions and afternoon adventure activities that would test everyone's physical capabilities. His assumption was that the outdoor challenges would reveal Maya's limitations and expose her military persona as compensation for average athletic abilities. Brad's own fitness experience was limited to recreational activities and gym workouts that bore no resemblance to the conditioning required for military operations in combat environments. The resort's adventure programming included rock climbing experiences managed by professional guides who specialized in introducing corporate groups to outdoor activities with minimal risk and maximum accessibility. The climbing walls featured automated belay systems and safety equipment designed to accommodate participants with no previous climbing experience, ensuring that corporate liability concerns were addressed while providing adventure experiences that could enhance team building and individual confidence. Maya observed the resort's safety protocols with the analytical perspective of someone whose military training included extensive risk assessment and emergency preparedness. She noted the facility's dependence on electronic systems for safety management, the limited backup procedures for equipment failures, and the staff's apparent assumption that controlled environments eliminated the need for comprehensive emergency planning. Her observations reflected habits developed through military operations where inadequate preparation could result in mission failure and personnel casualties. The first evening's dinner featured locally sourced ingredients prepared by resort chefs who specialized in creating sophisticated meals that appealed to urban palates while suggesting connection to regional culinary traditions. The presentation emphasized sustainability and environmental consciousness, values that resonated with technology industry professionals who wanted to maintain progressive credentials while enjoying luxury accommodations and services. Dinner conversation topics reflected the interests and concerns typical of marketing industry professionals, including discussions of client relationships, industry trends, and career advancement strategies. Maya participated in these conversations with professional engagement, while avoiding personal revelations that would invite additional speculation about her background. Her contributions demonstrated knowledge of business practices and marketing strategies without revealing the leadership experience and crisis management skills developed through military service. David Richardson, Maya's supervisor, used the dinner setting to announce the retreat's professional development agenda, which included workshops on creative problem-solving, strategic planning, and leadership development. The program was designed by corporate training specialists who had developed curriculum for technology companies seeking to enhance innovation and team performance. Richardson's enthusiasm for the training reflected his belief that systematic approaches to creativity and leadership could be learned through structured exercises and group activities. The evening concluded with informal socializing in the resort's lounge area, where colleagues gathered around the fireplace to continue conversations begun during dinner. The atmosphere was carefully designed to encourage personal connections and workplace relationship building through relaxed social interactions that revealed individual personalities beyond professional roles. Maya participated in these activities for the minimum time required by social courtesy before retiring to her room to maintain the personal boundaries that protected her privacy. Maya's accommodation was a standard resort room equipped with luxury amenities and technology features, designed to maintain connectivity with urban work environments. She conducted her usual evening routine, which included equipment checks, communication with family members, and physical exercises that maintained her fitness levels regardless of location or circumstances. Her disciplined schedule reflected military habits that had become essential to her psychological well-being and professional effectiveness. The resort's evening security procedures relied primarily on electronic monitoring systems and automated access controls that regulated building entry and room access through digital keycards. Maya noted the facility's limited physical security presence and the staff's apparent assumption that controlled access and remote monitoring provided adequate protection for corporate groups in wilderness settings. Her assessment reflected security awareness developed through military training that emphasized personal responsibility for situational awareness and emergency preparedness. The first night's sleep was interrupted by natural sounds that urban-dwelling colleagues found either charming or disturbing, depending on their previous experience with wilderness environments. Maya's military training had accustomed her to sleeping in various environments and maintaining alertness for potential threats, capabilities that allowed her to rest effectively while remaining aware of her surroundings. Her sleep patterns reflected habits developed during overseas deployments where constant vigilance was essential for survival. The second day's programming began with a group hiking excursion led by resort staff who specialized in guiding corporate groups through scenic mountain trails. The route was selected to provide spectacular views and photo opportunities while remaining accessible to participants with varying fitness levels and outdoor experience. The guides carried safety equipment and communication devices that connected them to resort emergency services, ensuring that medical assistance could be summoned quickly if needed. Maya's hiking performance immediately distinguished her from colleagues whose outdoor experience was limited to urban fitness activities and recreational weekend excursions. Her pace remained steady regardless of terrain changes. Her breathing remained controlled during uphill sections that challenged other participants, and her attention to trail conditions reflected awareness of environmental factors that could affect group safety. The physical capabilities that her colleagues attributed to natural athleticism actually reflected conditioning, maintained through military fitness standards that exceeded civilian exercise requirements. The hiking guide, a young man whose outdoor experience included recreational climbing and wilderness education certification, was impressed by Maya's trail knowledge and situational awareness. She noticed environmental changes that suggested weather pattern shifts, identified potential hazards that could affect group safety, and demonstrated navigation skills that exceeded those typical of corporate retreat participants. The guide assumed Maya was an experienced recreational hiker rather than recognizing the military training that shaped her outdoor capabilities. Brad Morrison struggled to maintain his position as the group's fitness leader when Maya's superior conditioning became apparent during the hiking excursion. His competitive nature led him to increase his pace in an attempt to challenge Maya's endurance, but her military training allowed her to match any pace he could sustain while maintaining energy reserves that would be essential during emergency situations. The physical competition that Brad initiated inadvertently demonstrated the gap between recreational fitness and military conditioning. Jessica Winters documented the hiking experience through social media, posts that emphasized the group's adventure, spirit, and outdoor accomplishments. Her photographs and comments reflected urban perspectives on wilderness experiences, treating the managed resort environment as genuine outdoor adventure rather than recognizing the controlled nature of corporate retreat activities. Maya avoided participating in the social media documentation, maintaining privacy boundaries that protected her from unwanted attention and speculation about her background. The afternoon's team-building activities included problem-solving exercises designed to enhance collaboration and creative thinking through structured challenges that required group coordination and individual contribution. The activities were managed by corporate training specialists who used outdoor settings to create scenarios that supposedly replicated workplace challenges while providing adventure experiences that enhanced participant engagement and learning. Retention. Maya approached the team-building exercises with the same systematic analysis that characterized her approach to all professional activities. She identified optimal solutions quickly and contributed effectively to group coordination, but her leadership capabilities remained constrained by workplace dynamics that positioned her as an outsider, whose military background was treated as irrelevant to corporate problem-solving requirements. Her actual experience leading military units through complex operations remained hidden behind assumptions about her authenticity and qualifications. The systematic marginalization of Maya's military experience at Preston and Associates had begun during her second week of employment when the company's quarterly performance review process revealed institutional biases that would define her professional trajectory for the following months. The evaluation criteria emphasized technological proficiency, creative innovation, and cultural adaptability within corporate environments, metrics that effectively discounted military training and combat experience as irrelevant to marketing. Industry success. Maya's first performance assessment had generated scores that accurately reflected her exceptional work quality and professional reliability, while simultaneously penalizing her for characteristics that were actually strengths developed through military service. Her methodical approach to project planning was criticized as inflexibility that limited creative brainstorming sessions. Her preference for clear communication and defined objectives was characterized as resistance to collaborative work environments that thrived on ambiguity and spontaneous innovation. The evaluation process included 360-degree feedback from colleagues and clients that revealed the social isolation Maya experienced within the corporate culture. While clients consistently praised her professionalism, cultural sensitivity, and ability to deliver results under pressure, her coworkers provided comments that suggested she was difficult to connect with on personal levels and maintained boundaries that prevented authentic workplace relationships from developing. David Richardson had delivered Maya's performance review with the patronizing tone of a supervisor who believed he was providing constructive guidance to an employee who needed to adapt better to corporate expectations. "Maya, your work quality is exceptional, and clients appreciate your reliability," he had explained while consulting evaluation documents that reduced her military experience to a series of checkbox categories. "However, you need to work on team integration and creative collaboration. The marketing industry values personality and authentic connections as much as technical competence." The feedback had stung because it revealed how thoroughly her military identity was misunderstood by civilians who interpreted her professional discipline as social dysfunction. Richardson's suggestions for improvement included participating more actively in office social events, sharing personal stories that would help colleagues connect with her background, and adopting a more flexible approach to project management that accommodated creative processes rather than imposing military-style structure on collaborative work environments. Maya's assignment to lower-profile clients and routine projects had been justified through performance management language that disguised institutional bias as professional development strategy. While her colleagues worked on high-visibility campaigns for technology companies and innovative startups, Maya was consistently assigned to traditional clients, whose marketing needs were considered less challenging and creatively stimulating. The assignment pattern effectively limited her opportunities for career advancement, while maintaining the appearance of equal treatment. The company's professional development budget allocation had similarly discriminated against Maya's military background by prioritizing training opportunities that emphasized creative skills and technological innovation over leadership development and crisis management capabilities. While her colleagues attended expensive conferences focused on digital marketing trends and creative strategy, Maya was encouraged to pursue courses in team collaboration and workplace communication skills that assumed her military experience was a liability rather than an asset. Maya's exclusion from Preston and Associates' most prestigious client presentations had been accomplished through scheduling decisions that appeared routine but consistently prevented her from participating in high-stakes meetings where her crisis management experience and cross-cultural communication skills would have been most valuable. When questioned about these patterns, Richardson had explained that client presentations required personality types that matched corporate culture expectations rather than military formality that might seem intimidating to creative industry professionals. Social dynamics within Preston and Associates had created an informal hierarchy that positioned Maya as an outsider whose military background was treated as an eccentricity rather than professional qualification. Office conversations about current events, travel experiences, and career aspirations consistently excluded military perspectives, with colleagues assuming that Maya's input would be irrelevant to discussions about civilian life and corporate career advancement strategies. Jessica Winters had become the unofficial spokesperson for colleague skepticism about Maya's military service, organizing informal discussions that questioned the authenticity of her background while reinforcing assumptions about what female veterans should look like and how military experience should be presented in corporate environments. These conversations typically occurred during lunch breaks or after work, social gatherings where Maya's absence allowed for speculation that went unchallenged by alternative perspectives. "I mean, think about it logically," Jessica would explain to groups of colleagues who gathered around her desk during afternoon breaks. "She's way too polished and put together to have been crawling through combat zones. Real military people are usually more rough around the edges, right? And those tattoos are obviously done by expensive artists, not some military-based tattoo parlor. The whole thing is just too convenient and perfectly executed to be authentic." The speculation about Maya's tattoos had become particularly focused and persistent, with colleagues developing elaborate theories about their origin and meaning that demonstrated complete ignorance of military culture and symbolic traditions. Brad Morrison had appointed himself the office expert on military tattoos based on his casual research and social media consumption, explaining to anyone who would listen that authentic military ink was typically crude and improvised rather than the sophisticated artwork that covered Maya's arms and torso. Military tattoos are usually done in overseas shops with questionable hygiene standards. Brad would pontificate during coffee breaks, speaking with the authority of someone whose military knowledge came from YouTube videos and action movies. They're supposed to be rough and meaningful, not these elaborate artistic pieces that look like they came from some trendy tattoo studio. Plus, real military people don't usually cover up their ink like she does. They're proud of their service and want to display it. Maya's workplace wardrobe choices had been interpreted as further evidence of inauthentic military presentation, with colleagues assuming that her conservative clothing reflected insecurity about fake tattoos rather than professional standards. Developed through military culture that emphasized appropriate appearance in civilian environments, her practice of covering military-related tattoos during work hours was seen as suspicious behavior rather than understanding that recognizing appropriate context for displaying military imagery and insignia, the company's veteran hiring initiatives, had been implemented with good intentions but limited understanding of veteran needs and experiences, creating policies that appeared supportive while actually perpetuating the biases that marginalized military personnel in corporate environments. Maya had been counted as a successful diversity hire that fulfilled veteran employment targets, but her workplace integration reflected the same assumptions and stereotypes that characterized civilian attitudes toward military service in general. Preston Associates Veteran Support Program included mentorship opportunities with senior executives who had no military background and limited understanding of veteran transition challenges. Maya had been assigned to a mentor who specialized in career development for female professionals, but approached military experience as an obstacle to overcome rather than a qualification to leverage. The mentoring sessions focused on helping Maya adapt to corporate culture rather than finding ways to apply her military skills to marketing industry challenges. The Employee Resource Group for Veterans had attracted limited participation because most Preston and Associates employees with military backgrounds preferred to minimize their service identity rather than risk the professional marginalization that Maya experienced. The group's activities were planned by human resources staff who organized social events around patriotic holidays and career development, workshops that treated military experience as a specialized interest rather than relevant professional qualification. Maya's compensation and advancement opportunities had been affected by evaluation processes that systematically undervalued military experience, while rewarding characteristics that were actually developed through military training but attributed to personal traits unrelated to service background. Her leadership capabilities during crisis situations were acknowledged but not connected to military training, instead being characterized as natural problem-solving abilities that would have developed regardless of her background. The annual salary review process had revealed the financial impact of institutional bias, with Maya receiving increases that reflected her work quality while remaining below market rates for professionals with her level of responsibility and client management success. When she had inquired about the compensation disparity, Richardson had explained that salary advancement required demonstrated growth in areas where Maya's military background was considered irrelevant or potentially limiting. Maya's client relationship management had actually exceeded company standards, with several major accounts specifically requesting her involvement in their campaigns due to her cultural sensitivity, crisis management skills, and ability to navigate complex political situations that challenged other account managers. However, these successes were attributed to personal characteristics rather than military training, effectively discounting the value of her service experience for civilian employment advancement. The company's approach to workplace diversity had included unconscious bias training that addressed racial and gender discrimination while completely ignoring the stereotypes and assumptions that affected veteran employees. The training modules focused on creating inclusive environments for various demographic groups, but failed to address the specific challenges faced by military personnel transitioning to civilian careers where their experience was misunderstood or dismissed. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya's professional relationships with clients had provided the validation and respect that was absent from her workplace interactions with colleagues. Several client representatives were veterans who immediately recognized her authentic military background and appreciated the unique perspective she brought to their marketing challenges. These relationships had become essential sources of professional satisfaction and personal connection that compensated for the isolation she experienced within Preston Associates. CORPORATE culture. The upcoming performance review cycle had generated anxiety for Maya because she understood that her military identity would continue to be evaluated as a liability rather than an asset, regardless of her actual work performance and client satisfaction scores. The evaluation criteria emphasized qualities that military training had actually enhanced, but the assessment process was designed to discount military experience while rewarding characteristics that were valued within corporate culture but irrelevant to professional effectiveness. Maya's preparation for the corporate retreat had included careful consideration of how the extended social interaction would affect her workplace relationships and professional standing. She understood that 3 days of close proximity with colleagues who questioned her authenticity would provide additional opportunities for speculation and judgment about her background, but she also recognized that mandatory attendance meant she had no choice but to navigate these challenges while maintaining her professional boundaries and personal integrity. The retreat's informal atmosphere would make it more difficult for Maya to maintain the careful separation between her military identity and corporate persona that had protected her from workplace drama during her 8 months at Preston Associates. The extended social activities and shared accommodations would inevitably reveal additional details about her background, habits, and capabilities that her colleagues would interpret through their existing assumptions about her military service. Authenticity. Maya's luggage for the mountain retreat had been packed with the efficiency and preparedness that characterized all her activities, but she understood that her colleagues would view her equipment choices and organizational habits as further evidence of military role-playing rather than recognition of genuine training and experience. The comprehensive emergency supplies, precise packing methodology, and backup equipment reflected military protocols that her coworkers would interpret as theatrical props designed to enhance her military image rather than practical preparedness. For potential emergency situations, the warning came during the second day's afternoon planning session, when Maya noticed atmospheric conditions and seismic indicators that her military training had taught her to recognize as potentially dangerous signs. The corporate retreat was scheduled to continue for 1 more day, with evening activities planned in the resort's main lodge and morning departure scheduled for the following day. However, Maya's experience conducting operations in unstable regions had developed her ability to assess environmental risks that civilian emergency planning typically overlooked. The Cascade Mountains were located in an active seismic zone where geological surveys had documented numerous fault lines and earthquake risks, but the resort's emergency procedures were designed around common hospitality industry scenarios rather than major natural disasters. Maya had reviewed the facility's emergency protocols during her arrival check-in process, noting that evacuation plans assumed that communication systems would remain functional and that emergency services would be accessible through standard channels. During the afternoon break between scheduled activities, Maya had walked the resort perimeter to assess the surrounding terrain and identify potential escape routes that would be necessary if the main access road became impassable. Her reconnaissance revealed that Cascade Mountain Resort was essentially isolated, with a single mountain road providing the only vehicle access to the facility. The backup communication systems consisted of cellular towers and internet infrastructure that would be vulnerable to power failures or physical damage from seismic activity. Maya approached David Richardson during the late afternoon cocktail reception, choosing a moment when he was separated from other colleagues who would dismiss her concerns as military paranoia or attention-seeking behavior. "David, I need to discuss some safety concerns about our location and the weather patterns I've been observing," she began, keeping her voice low to avoid attracting attention from other retreat participants who were enjoying drinks and informal conversation. Richardson's initial response reflected the same patronizing attitude that characterized his usual interactions with Maya's professional input. "Maya, this is a luxury resort with comprehensive safety protocols and professional management. I think we can trust their expertise over amateur weather observations," he replied, his tone suggesting that he was humoring an employee whose military background had created excessive anxiety about routine travel situations. "David, I'm not talking about weather," Maya persisted, maintaining the respectful tone required by corporate hierarchy while trying to convey the urgency of her observations. "I've been monitoring seismic activity indicators that suggest potential earthquake risks in this region. The geological signs include ground temperature variations, unusual animal behavior, and atmospheric pressure changes that often precede major seismic events. We should consider evacuating to lower elevations as a precautionary measure." Richardson's expression shifted from polite dismissal to barely concealed irritation as he realized that Maya was suggesting the retreat should be terminated early based on her amateur geological assessment. "Maya, earthquake prediction is an extremely complex scientific field that requires specialized equipment and expert analysis. I don't think your military experience qualifies you to make seismic safety assessments that would override professional resort management and emergency planning systems." Maya had anticipated this response and came prepared with specific technical information that demonstrated her knowledge of geological warning signs. "David, during my deployments in Afghanistan, I received extensive training in recognizing seismic activity because earthquakes were common in the regions where we operated. The signs I'm observing here match patterns that preceded major earthquakes in those areas. I'm not trying to predict exactly when something might happen, but the risk indicators suggest we should take precautionary measures." The conversation was interrupted by Jessica Winters, who had noticed Maya and Richardson engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion during what was supposed to be a relaxed social gathering. "What are you two talking about so intensely?" Jessica asked with the invasive curiosity that characterized her approach to office social dynamics. "Maya, you look like you're giving some kind of military briefing instead of enjoying our corporate retreat." Richardson seized the opportunity to deflect Maya's concerns by including Jessica in the conversation, knowing that she would provide support for dismissing what he considered Maya's inappropriate alarmism. "Maya is concerned about earthquake risks and thinks we should consider leaving the resort early," he explained with the tone of someone sharing an amusing anecdote rather than discussing legitimate safety concerns. Jessica's response was exactly what Richardson had expected, combining mockery with the kind of scientific ignorance that characterized civilian attitudes toward military expertise. "Oh my God, Maya, you're seriously trying to predict earthquakes now. What's next? Reading tea leaves to forecast the weather? This is exactly the kind of military drama queen behavior that makes everyone uncomfortable. Can't you just relax and enjoy the retreat without turning everything into some kind of survival scenario?" Maya felt the familiar frustration of having her expertise dismissed by people whose knowledge was limited to television shows and social media posts. But she maintained her professional composure while trying once more to communicate the genuine nature of her concerns. Jessica, this isn't drama or role-playing. The geological indicators I'm observing are specific signs that military personnel are trained to recognize, because earthquake activity can affect operational safety in unstable regions. I'm not predicting when something will happen, but I am identifying risk factors that warrant precautionary measures. Brad Morrison had joined the conversation after overhearing Jessica's comment about earthquake predictions, bringing his own brand of condescending expertise to the discussion. Maya, I took geology courses in college, and earthquake prediction is basically impossible, even with sophisticated scientific equipment. You can't just look around and decide that an earthquake is coming based on military training. That's not how seismic science works. The growing audience of colleagues had attracted additional attention from other retreat participants, creating exactly the kind of public spectacle that Maya had hoped to avoid by approaching Richardson privately. Her attempt to communicate legitimate safety concerns was being transformed into entertainment for coworkers, who viewed her military background as a source of amusing anecdotes rather than relevant professional expertise. Look, everyone, Maya said, raising her voice slightly to address the gathered group while maintaining the respectful tone required by workplace hierarchy. I understand that earthquake prediction sounds dramatic, but I'm not claiming to predict anything specific. I'm observing environmental indicators that suggest increased seismic risk in this region. Military training includes recognizing these signs because earthquakes can affect operational safety in unstable geological areas. The resort's assistant manager, Chen, had noticed the gathering of corporate guests engaged in what appeared to be an animated discussion about safety concerns, and he approached the group with the professional courtesy that hospitality staff use to address guest concerns while maintaining facility reputation. Good evening, everyone. I couldn't help but notice your discussion about safety topics. Is there anything I can help clarify about our resort's emergency procedures or safety protocols? Richardson took the opportunity to demonstrate his leadership authority by addressing the resort staff member directly while dismissing Maya's concerns in a way that would end the discussion and restore the evening's social atmosphere. Tyler, one of our employees, has some concerns about earthquake risks, but we're confident in your facility's safety management and emergency planning. We don't want to disrupt the retreat schedule based on amateur geological speculation. Tyler's response reflected standard hospitality, industry training for managing guest concerns, while protecting the resort's reputation and avoiding unnecessary alarm among other visitors. I can assure you that Cascade Mountain Resort maintains comprehensive emergency protocols and safety monitoring systems that meet all regulatory requirements. Our facility has operated safely for over 15 years, and we have excellent relationships with local emergency services and geological monitoring agencies. Maya recognized that pursuing the conversation further would only reinforce her colleague's perception that she was creating unnecessary drama based on military paranoia, but she felt obligated to make one final attempt to communicate the seriousness of her observations. Tyler, I appreciate your facility's safety record, but I'm specifically concerned about seismic activity indicators that your standard monitoring systems might not detect. Has your facility received any recent geological surveys or earthquake risk assessments? Tyler's professional smile remained fixed as he provided the standard reassurance that resort management used to address guest safety concerns without acknowledging specific risks that could create liability issues or damage the facility's reputation. Our resort maintains current safety certifications and follows all recommended emergency procedures. We work closely with regional authorities to ensure guest safety under all circumstances. The conversation concluded with Richardson's definitive statement that the retreat would continue as planned, effectively dismissing Maya's concerns while establishing his authority as the senior executive responsible for group safety decisions. Thank you, Tyler. We appreciate your facility's safety commitment, and we're confident in your professional management. Maya, I think we can trust the resort's expertise and enjoy the remainder of our retreat without unnecessary anxiety about theoretical geological risks. Maya understood that further argument would only damage her professional standing while failing to convince anyone to take precautionary measures that could prevent casualties if her assessment proved accurate. She had fulfilled her obligation to warn about potential dangers, but the institutional bias that discounted her military expertise had prevented her concerns from receiving serious consideration. The same colleagues who mocked her background would blame her for not being more insistent if disaster struck, but would also criticize her for alarmism if her warnings proved unnecessary. The evening's activities continued with the forced normalcy that characterized corporate social events, where underlying tensions were disguised by professional courtesy and mandatory participation. Maya maintained her usual boundaries while participating in required social interactions, but her attention remained focused on the environmental indicators that continued to suggest increasing seismic risk throughout the evening hours at the resorts. Evening entertainment included presentations about local geology and natural history that inadvertently confirmed several of Maya's observations about regional earthquake activity and fault line configurations. The educational materials acknowledged that the Cascade Mountains were seismically active and that major earthquakes had occurred historically in the region, but the information was presented as interesting background rather than current safety considerations. Maya's room assignment for the final night provided a clear view of the surrounding mountain terrain, allowing her to continue monitoring environmental conditions that her training had taught her to evaluate for potential danger. Signs: the atmospheric pressure changes, unusual animal behavior, and ground temperature variations that had initially caught her attention were becoming more pronounced as the evening progressed, suggesting that seismic activity was increasingly likely. Resort's communication systems remained fully functional throughout the evening, with guests using cellular phones and internet access to maintain contact with family members and business associates. The reliable connectivity reinforced the assumption that emergency communication would be available if needed, but Maya's military experience had taught her that infrastructure systems were often the first casualties of major natural disasters. Maya's final attempt to communicate her concerns occurred during a brief conversation with Tyler Chen when she encountered him during her evening reconnaissance of the facility perimeter. Tyler, I know this sounds alarmist, but the geological indicators I've been monitoring suggest that seismic activity is becoming increasingly likely. Has your facility conducted any earthquake drills or evacuation exercises recently? Tyler's response reflected the careful balance between guest service and risk management that characterized hospitality industry training for addressing safety concerns without creating unnecessary alarm or legal liability. Ma'am, our facility maintains current emergency procedures and safety protocols that are regularly reviewed and updated. We appreciate your concerns, but we're confident in our safety management systems and emergency preparedness capabilities. Maya returned to her room understanding that she had done everything possible to warn about potential dangers within the constraints of corporate hierarchy and civilian skepticism about military expertise. Her emergency preparation for the night included positioning essential equipment for immediate access and identifying escape routes that would be necessary if the building structure was compromised by seismic activity. The same preparedness that her colleagues interpreted as military theater could become essential for survival if her assessment proved accurate. The earthquake struck at 3:47 a.m. with a magnitude that instantly transformed Cascade Mountain Resort from a luxury corporate retreat into a disaster zone where survival depended on skills that had nothing to do with marketing expertise or digital innovation. The initial tremor lasted only seconds, but its intensity was sufficient to collapse portions of the main lodge, sever the access road at multiple points, and disable the electrical grid that powered the resort's communication systems and emergency lighting. Maya had been awake when the seismic activity began, her military-trained alertness having detected the subtle preliminary vibrations that preceded the major earthquake by approximately 90 seconds. Her room was located on the ground floor of the guest accommodation building, a position she had specifically requested during check-in because her tactical training emphasized the importance of maintaining ground-level access during emergency situations where rapid evacuation might be necessary. The violent shaking that followed the initial tremor threw furniture across Maya's room and shattered the large windows that provided scenic mountain views under normal circumstances. Her emergency preparations allowed her to immediately access essential equipment and protective gear that she had positioned strategically throughout the room before retiring for the evening. Within 30 seconds of the earthquake's onset, Maya was fully dressed and equipped with emergency supplies that would prove essential for survival in the chaotic hours that followed. The resort's main lodge, where most of the evening's social activities had taken place just hours earlier, had suffered catastrophic structural damage that trapped dozens of guests and staff members beneath collapsed timber beams and shattered glass. The building's rustic design, which had provided such impressive aesthetic appeal during daylight hours, became a deadly liability when the massive wooden support structures failed under seismic stress that exceeded the facility's engineering specifications. Maya's first priority was conducting immediate reconnaissance to assess the scope of the disaster and identify survivors who required emergency medical attention. Her movement through the damaged resort complex demonstrated the tactical awareness and crisis management skills that her colleagues had dismissed as military role-playing during the previous day's discussions about earthquake risks. Every step was calculated to minimize exposure to additional structural collapse, while maximizing her ability to locate and assist injured personnel. The communication systems that had provided reliable connectivity throughout the corporate retreat were completely disabled, with cellular towers damaged by the earthquake and internet infrastructure severed at multiple points. The resort's emergency communication equipment, which was supposed to provide backup contact with regional emergency services, had been housed in the main lodge where structural collapse had destroyed the radio equipment and emergency broadcast systems. Maya discovered the first group of injured colleagues in the lobby area of the guest accommodation building, where falling debris had trapped 4 Preston Associates employees beneath a collapsed section of decorative timber framework. Brad Morrison was unconscious with obvious head trauma. Jessica Winters had sustained a compound fracture of her left arm, and 2 other colleagues were suffering from various cuts and bruises that required immediate medical attention. The emergency medical supplies that Maya had packed for the retreat, which her colleagues had mocked as evidence of her military obsession, suddenly became the only available medical equipment for treating serious injuries in an environment where professional medical assistance was inaccessible. Her military-issued first aid kit contained trauma supplies that exceeded typical civilian emergency preparation, including pressure bandages, splinting materials, and medications that were essential for treating shock and preventing infection. Maya's medical training, which had been developed through military combat operations, where battlefield medicine was often the difference between life and death, allowed her to assess and treat injuries with competence that far exceeded civilian first aid certification. She established triage priorities that focused medical attention on the most seriously injured while ensuring that less critical patients received appropriate care that prevented their conditions from deteriorating during the extended emergency. David Richardson emerged from his damaged room approximately 15 minutes after the earthquake, suffering from minor cuts and obvious disorientation that reflected his complete lack of experience with crisis situations that exceeded the scope of corporate problem-solving methodologies. His initial response was to demand immediate contact with resort management and emergency services, demonstrating the civilian assumption that professional assistance would be readily available during major disasters. "Maya, we need to contact the front desk immediately and get emergency services up here," Richardson announced with the authoritative tone he typically used during office crisis management situations. "This is obviously a major emergency, and we need professional help to coordinate evacuation and medical assistance for injured personnel. Where's the resort staff? And why aren't the emergency systems functioning?" Maya continued applying pressure. Bandages to Jessica's compound fracture while explaining the reality of their situation in terms that Richardson could understand despite his obvious shock and confusion. "David, the entire resort has been severely damaged by the earthquake. The main lodge has collapsed, communication systems are down, and the access road is blocked. We're completely isolated until emergency services can reach us, which could take many hours or even days, depending on regional damage assessment and rescue prioritization." The scope of the disaster became clearer as additional Preston and Associates employees emerged from their damaged accommodations, many suffering from injuries that required immediate medical attention. Maya's systematic approach to crisis management involved establishing a central triage area where injured personnel could receive medical treatment, while being protected from additional structural collapse and exposure to mountain weather conditions that would become increasingly dangerous as shock and hypothermia affected trauma victims. Tyler Chen, the resort's assistant manager, had survived the collapse of the main lodge but sustained serious injuries that included possible internal bleeding and obvious signs of traumatic brain injury. His confused attempts to implement standard hospitality emergency procedures demonstrated the inadequacy of conventional disaster planning when faced with catastrophic infrastructure failure that exceeded the scope of routine emergency response protocols. Maya's assessment of the overall situation revealed that Cascade Mountain Resort housed approximately 60 guests and staff members at the time of the earthquake, with initial casualty estimates suggesting that at least 15 people had sustained serious injuries requiring immediate medical intervention. The structural damage to resort buildings made it unsafe to remain in most accommodation areas, necessitating the establishment of outdoor emergency shelters that could protect survivors from mountain weather conditions while providing access to medical treatment and coordination of rescue efforts. The emergency supplies that Maya had brought to the retreat, which had been dismissed as unnecessary military paranoia, suddenly became essential resources for group survival in an environment where conventional support systems had been completely eliminated. Her emergency food rations, water purification equipment, and shelter materials provided the foundation for sustaining 60 people during an extended emergency period that could last several days before professional rescue operations could reach the isolated mountain location. Maya's leadership during the immediate post-earthquake period reflected military training that emphasized rapid decision-making and resource allocation under extreme stress conditions. She organized work teams that focused on searching for additional survivors, securing emergency shelter areas, and establishing communication procedures that would be essential for coordinating rescue efforts. When professional emergency services eventually reached the disaster site, the civilian employees who had questioned Maya's military authenticity were forced to confront the reality that their corporate problem-solving skills were completely inadequate for managing life and death situations that required immediate action rather than committee discussions and consensus-building processes. The collaborative leadership styles that were valued in marketing industry environments became liabilities in crisis situations where delayed decisions could result in additional casualties and deteriorating survival conditions. Jessica Winters, despite her serious arm injury, attempted to maintain her social leadership role by organizing group discussions, about evacuation priorities and resource allocation decisions. Her proposals reflected civilian assumptions about democratic decision-making that were completely inappropriate for emergency situations, where military-style command structure was essential for effective crisis management and survival coordination. Maya, we need to discuss these decisions as a group and make sure everyone has input into our survival strategy, Jessica announced while Maya was treating Brad Morrison's head trauma with techniques that required immediate implementation to prevent brain swelling and potential death. This is still a corporate retreat, and we should maintain our collaborative approach to problem solving, even under these challenging circumstances. Maya's response reflected the tension between civilian expectations and military realities that characterized crisis leadership in situations where democratic processes could result in fatal delays and poor decision-making. Jessica, this is not a corporate brainstorming session. People are dying, and survival requires immediate action based on experience and training rather than group consensus. We can discuss participation opportunities after we've addressed life-threatening medical emergencies and established basic survival infrastructure. The psychological impact of the disaster on civilian personnel became apparent as the initial shock wore off and the reality of their situation became clear. Several Preston Associates employees exhibited symptoms of acute stress reactions that interfered with their ability to contribute effectively to survival efforts, requiring Maya to manage both medical emergencies and psychological crisis intervention. Simultaneously, Richardson's leadership authority, which had been based on corporate hierarchy and administrative responsibility, became meaningless in an environment where survival depended on practical skills and crisis management experience, rather than meeting facilitation and budget oversight capabilities. His attempts to maintain executive decision-making control actually hindered emergency response efforts by creating confusion about leadership structure and resource allocation priorities. Maya's systematic approach to disaster response included establishing communication protocols that would be essential for coordinating with emergency services when professional rescue operations eventually reached the mountain location. She positioned emergency signaling equipment in strategic locations and organized search teams that could guide rescue personnel to survivor locations while providing accurate casualty reports and medical needs assessment. The mountain weather conditions that had provided such scenic beauty during the corporate retreat became additional survival challenges as temperature dropped and wind patterns increased the risk of hypothermia among injured personnel who were unable to maintain adequate body heat. Maya's military experience with cold weather operations provided essential knowledge for preventing weather-related casualties that could compound the medical emergencies created by earthquake injuries. The food and water supplies available at the damaged resort were sufficient for short-term survival, but Maya's emergency planning included rationing procedures that would extend available resources for the extended period that might be required before professional rescue operations could evacuate all survivors. Her military training in logistics and resource management provided the organizational framework for sustaining 60 people under conditions where resupply was impossible and conservation was essential for group survival. The civilian employees, who had spent the previous day questioning Maya's military credentials, were forced to acknowledge that their technological dependence and urban lifestyle had provided no preparation for survival situations that required practical skills and crisis management experience. The same military training that they had dismissed as obsolete role-playing had become the only available expertise for managing a disaster that exceeded the scope of civilian emergency planning and corporate crisis management protocols. The desperate situation reached its critical turning point at dawn on the first day after the earthquake, when David Richardson finally abandoned his attempts to maintain corporate leadership authority and approached Maya with the humbling request that would fundamentally alter the power dynamics among the Preston and Associates survivors. The overnight hours had been marked by deteriorating medical conditions among the seriously injured, failed attempts to establish communication with emergency services, and the growing realization that conventional rescue expectations were unrealistic. Given the scope of regional disaster damage, Richardson found Maya conducting morning medical rounds among the injured personnel, checking vital signs and adjusting treatment procedures with the systematic thoroughness that characterized military medical protocols. Brad Morrison's head trauma had stabilized overnight, but he remained unconscious and required constant monitoring to detect signs of brain swelling that could prove fatal without immediate medical intervention. Jessica Winters was experiencing severe pain from her compound fracture, and several other colleagues were showing early symptoms of shock and hypothermia that could quickly become life-threatening without proper treatment. "Maya, I need to speak with you privately," Richardson said, his voice carrying none of the condescending authority that had characterized their previous interactions. The earthquake had stripped away the corporate hierarchy that had positioned him as Maya's supervisor, replacing artificial administrative power with the harsh reality that survival depended on competence rather than organizational charts and performance evaluation metrics. Maya completed her examination of Chen's head injury before responding to Richardson's request, maintaining the medical priorities that her training required regardless of workplace politics or personal considerations. "David, I can spare a few minutes, but I need to continue monitoring the seriously injured patients. Brad's condition is still critical, and Tyler is showing signs of possible internal bleeding that could require emergency surgery if his symptoms worsen." They walked to a position away from the other survivors where their conversation couldn't be overheard by colleagues who were already questioning Richardson's leadership capabilities and beginning to recognize Maya's superior crisis management skills. The isolation also protected Richardson from the humiliation of publicly acknowledging that his corporate authority was meaningless in a survival situation that required military expertise and practical emergency response capabilities. "Maya, I need to be honest about our situation," Richardson began, struggling with the admission that contradicted 8 months of institutional bias and professional dismissal. "It's becoming clear that my corporate management experience isn't adequate for handling this emergency. The other employees are looking to you for leadership, and frankly, your military background seems much more relevant to our current circumstances than anything I learned in business school." Maya had anticipated this conversation since the earthquake struck, understanding that crisis situations inevitably revealed the difference between theoretical leadership and practical competence. "David, I appreciate your honesty, but we need to be clear about what you're asking. If you want me to take operational command of our group's survival efforts, that means implementing military-style decision-making procedures and resource allocation that won't accommodate the collaborative consensus building that everyone is used to in corporate environments." Richardson's response reflected the desperation of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged by circumstances that exceeded his experience and training. "Maya, people are seriously injured and we're completely isolated. I don't care about corporate procedures or collaborative decision-making if those approaches are going to get people killed. What do you need from me to take charge of our survival efforts?" The formal transfer of leadership authority occurred through a process that Maya insisted be clearly communicated to all Preston and Associates personnel, eliminating any confusion about command structure and decision-making responsibility that could undermine emergency response effectiveness. Richardson gathered the mobile survivors and announced that Maya would be assuming operational command of their group's survival efforts, explicitly acknowledging that her military training provided superior qualifications for managing their current crisis situation. "Everyone, I need your attention for an important announcement," Richardson called out to the survivors who were gathered around the emergency shelter area that Maya had established using salvaged materials and strategic positioning to protect against additional structural collapse. After careful consideration of our situation, I'm transferring operational leadership to Maya. Her military experience and crisis management training are better suited to our current emergency circumstances than my corporate background. The announcement generated mixed reactions from Preston and Associates employees who had spent months questioning Maya's military authenticity but were now forced to confront the reality that their survival depended on expertise they had consistently dismissed as irrelevant to contemporary professional environments. Several colleagues who had been most vocal in their skepticism about her background now found themselves seeking reassurance from the person they had previously mocked for military role-playing and attention-seeking behavior, Jessica Winters. Despite her compound fracture and pain medication effects, attempted to challenge the leadership transition with arguments that reflected civilian assumptions about democratic participation in decision-making processes. Wait a minute, shouldn't we discuss this as a group? This is still a Preston and Associates corporate retreat, and we should maintain our collaborative approach to important decisions. Just because Maya has some military background doesn't mean she should have unilateral authority over everyone else's safety. Maya's response established the command authority that would be essential for effective crisis management while addressing the psychological needs of civilian personnel who were struggling to adapt to military-style leadership structures. Jessica, I understand your concerns about participation, but emergency situations require immediate decision-making based on experience and training rather than committee discussions. Everyone will have opportunities to contribute their skills and knowledge, but final decisions about safety and survival strategies need to be made by someone with relevant crisis management experience. The establishment of Maya's leadership authority included implementing communication protocols that ensured all personnel understood their roles and responsibilities within the emergency response structure. She organized work teams based on individual capabilities rather than corporate hierarchy, assigning tasks that maximized group survival prospects, while accommodating the physical limitations and psychological stress reactions that were affecting several colleagues. Brad Morrison's continued unconsciousness had created additional medical challenges that required Maya to make difficult decisions about resource allocation and treatment priorities. His condition required constant monitoring and specialized medical interventions that consumed supplies and personnel time that might be needed for other emergencies. But Maya's military training included triage protocols that emphasize saving lives whenever possible while maintaining overall group survival capabilities. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Tyler Chen's head injury had resulted in periods of confusion and disorientation that made him unreliable for providing information about resort facilities and emergency procedures that could be essential for survival planning. Maya's assessment of his condition suggested possible traumatic brain injury that could affect his cognitive function for an extended period, eliminating the resort expertise that could have been valuable for understanding facility resources and emergency systems. The search and rescue coordination that Maya implemented included establishing visual signals that would be visible to emergency aircraft and positioning personnel to guide ground rescue teams to survivor locations when professional assistance eventually reached the mountain area. Her military training provided knowledge of standard rescue procedures and communication protocols that civilian emergency planning typically didn't include, capabilities that could significantly reduce the time required for professional rescue operations to locate and evacuate all survivors. The rationing procedures that Maya instituted for food and water supplies reflected military logistics training that emphasized extending available resources for maximum survival duration while maintaining adequate nutrition levels for personnel who were performing physically demanding emergency response activities. The rationing decisions required difficult choices about individual needs versus group survival that civilian personnel found psychologically challenging, but were essential for preventing resource depletion before rescue operations could be completed. Maya's weapons and self-defense training became relevant when several survivors reported hearing sounds that suggested the presence of wild animals in the area around the damaged resort. The earthquake had disrupted local wildlife patterns and potentially attracted scavengers to the area, creating additional safety concerns that required constant vigilance and defensive preparations that exceeded civilian camping experience and outdoor recreation knowledge. The psychological counseling that Maya provided to colleagues suffering from acute stress reactions drew on military training that included managing combat stress and maintaining unit cohesion under extreme circumstances. Several Preston Associates employees were exhibiting symptoms that interfered with their ability to contribute to survival efforts, requiring intervention techniques that helped them process trauma while maintaining functional capability for essential tasks. The emergency shelter construction that Maya supervised utilized salvaged materials from damaged resort buildings combined with wilderness survival techniques that provided protection from mountain weather conditions while remaining mobile enough to relocate if additional seismic activity threatened their current position. The shelter design reflected military engineering principles that emphasized functionality and adaptability rather than comfort or aesthetic considerations. The medical supplies management that Maya implemented included establishing inventory controls and usage protocols that would extend available medications and treatment materials for the maximum possible duration. Her military medical training provided knowledge of alternative treatment methods and improvised medical procedures that could substitute for conventional medical supplies when professional medical equipment was unavailable. The communication attempts that Maya organized included multiple methods for attracting rescue attention and maintaining contact with potential emergency services, utilizing both electronic signaling devices and traditional emergency communication techniques that didn't depend on sophisticated technology or infrastructure systems that had been damaged by the earthquake. Maya's leadership during the critical first 24 hours after the earthquake demonstrated the practical value of military training that her colleagues had dismissed as obsolete role-playing. But the true test of her capabilities would come during the extended survival period that lay ahead before professional rescue operations could reach their isolated mountain location. The woman who had been mocked for her military authenticity had become the undisputed leader whose expertise would determine whether the Preston Associates corporate retreat would end in successful rescue or tragic casualties that could have been prevented with proper crisis management and emergency response capabilities. The irony was not lost on Maya that the same colleagues who had spent months questioning her military credentials were now depending entirely on the skills and experience they had consistently dismissed as irrelevant to contemporary professional environments. Their survival had become a direct demonstration of the value of military training and the dangerous consequences of institutional bias that discounted veteran expertise in favor of civilian assumptions about modern crisis management and emergency response capabilities. Maya's systematic approach to crisis management began manifesting its full effectiveness during the second day after the earthquake, when her military training provided solutions to survival challenges that civilian emergency planning had never anticipated. The comprehensive disaster response protocols she implemented demonstrated competencies that extended far beyond basic first aid and wilderness survival, encompassing logistics coordination, psychological warfare, and strategic planning that would determine whether the Preston Associates group would survive until professional rescue operations could reach their mountain location. The emergency shelter expansion that Maya supervised utilized engineering principles learned during military deployments where temporary base construction was essential for extended operations in hostile environments. She directed work teams in salvaging structural materials from damaged resort buildings, organizing the recovered resources according to load-bearing capacity, weather resistance, and modularity requirements that would allow the shelter system to be relocated or expanded. As circumstances changed, Maya's construction methodology reflected military engineering standards that prioritized functional efficiency over comfort considerations, creating shelter spaces that could protect 60 people from mountain weather conditions while providing access routes for emergency evacuation if additional seismic activity threatened their position. The design incorporated ventilation systems that prevented carbon monoxide accumulation from heating sources, drainage channels that directed water away from sleeping areas, and storage compartments that protected essential supplies from moisture and temperature fluctuations. The water procurement and purification system that Maya established demonstrated knowledge of field sanitation and resource management that exceeded civilian camping experience by significant margins. She identified multiple water sources in the surrounding area and implemented purification procedures that eliminated bacterial contamination and chemical pollutants that could cause serious illness among personnel whose immune systems were compromised by stress and inadequate nutrition. Maya's water management protocols included establishing consumption rationing that balanced individual hydration needs with group conservation requirements, implementing recycling procedures that maximize the utility of available water supplies, and maintaining quality control standards that prevented waterborne illnesses that could rapidly become life-threatening in an environment where medical treatment options were severely limited. The food procurement strategy that Maya developed utilized both salvaged resort supplies and wilderness foraging techniques that provided nutritional diversity, while extending available rations for maximum survival duration. Her military training included knowledge of edible plants and emergency nutrition that supplemented conventional food supplies with natural resources that civilian personnel would never have considered safe or appropriate for consumption. Maya organized foraging expeditions that systematically harvested edible vegetation, while avoiding toxic plants that could cause poisoning or allergic reactions among group members. Her botanical knowledge, developed through survival training in various international environments, provided access to protein sources and vitamin supplements that prevented malnutrition-related health problems that could compromise individual survival prospects and group morale. The medical treatment procedures that Maya implemented for seriously injured personnel reflected combat medicine training that emphasized stabilizing trauma patients under field conditions where sophisticated medical equipment and pharmaceutical supplies were unavailable. Her treatment of Brad Morrison's head trauma included techniques for monitoring intracranial pressure and preventing brain swelling that could prove fatal without immediate surgical intervention. Maya's improvised medical equipment utilized materials salvaged from resort facilities combined with wilderness medicine techniques that provided therapeutic capabilities equivalent to basic hospital emergency rooms. She constructed splinting systems for Jessica Winter's compound fracture, using precise measurements and padding that prevented additional tissue damage while promoting proper bone alignment for healing. The pain management protocols that Maya established for injured personnel included both pharmaceutical interventions, using available medications and alternative techniques that reduce suffering without depleting limited medical supplies. Her knowledge of pressure point therapy and stress reduction methods provided pain relief that allowed injured colleagues to contribute to survival efforts while conserving narcotic medications. For critical medical emergencies, Maya's psychological intervention techniques addressed the acute stress reactions and trauma responses that were affecting several Preston Associates employees, utilizing military mental health training that emphasized maintaining unit cohesion and individual functionality. under extreme circumstances. Her counseling approach focused on providing coping mechanisms that allowed personnel to process their emotional responses while maintaining the psychological stability necessary for contributing to group survival efforts. The leadership structure that Maya implemented distributed responsibilities according to individual capabilities while maintaining clear command authority that prevented confusion and conflict during critical decision-making situations. She assigned specific roles to each group member based on their skills, physical condition, and psychological stability, creating organizational efficiency that maximized collective survival prospects, while providing meaningful participation opportunities for all personnel. Maya's delegation methodology included establishing backup leadership for essential functions, ensuring that critical survival operations could continue if key personnel became incapacitated by injury or illness. The redundancy planning reflected military organizational principles that emphasized mission continuity regardless of individual casualties or equipment failures. The security protocols that Maya established addressed multiple threat scenarios that could endanger group survival, including wildlife encounters, structural collapse risks, and potential human threats from other disaster survivors who might compete for limited resources. Her security planning included establishing perimeter, monitoring systems and defensive positions that could protect the group while avoiding unnecessary confrontation with external threats. Maya's threat assessment procedures utilized reconnaissance techniques that provided advance warning of potential dangers, while maintaining operational security that prevented the group's location from being discovered by hostile elements. Her situational awareness training included identifying environmental changes that could indicate approaching threats or deteriorating conditions that required immediate response. The communication systems that Maya developed included multiple redundant methods for attracting rescue attention and maintaining contact with potential emergency services, utilizing both electronic signaling devices and traditional emergency communication techniques that functioned independently of infrastructure systems damaged by the earthquake. Maya's signaling protocols included establishing scheduled transmission times and standardized message formats that would be recognizable to professional rescue personnel, maximizing the probability that their emergency communications would be received and properly interpreted by search and rescue operations. Her communication planning also included procedures for confirming rescue contact and coordinating evacuation logistics that would ensure all personnel could be safely removed from the disaster site. The inventory management system that Maya implemented tracked all available resources with military precision, ensuring optimal allocation of supplies, while maintaining reserve stockpiles for emergency situations that could require extended survival periods. Her logistics protocols included establishing consumption tracking that prevented waste while ensuring adequate nutrition and medical care for all personnel. Maya's resource allocation decisions required balancing individual needs with group survival requirements, making difficult choices about priority distribution that could affect life and death outcomes for seriously injured colleagues. Her military training provided ethical frameworks for these decisions that emphasized saving the maximum number of lives while maintaining group cohesion and morale. The work coordination that Maya supervised ensured that essential survival tasks were completed efficiently while preventing overexertion that could compromise individual health and group capability. Her task assignment methodology distributed physical demands according to individual capacity while providing skill development opportunities that enhanced overall group competence and self-sufficiency. Maya's training programs for civilian personnel included teaching basic survival skills that allowed colleagues to contribute more effectively to group survival efforts, while developing capabilities that could prove essential if the emergency situation became prolonged. Her instruction covered wilderness navigation, emergency medical procedures, and resource procurement techniques that expanded the group's collective survival expertise. The morale maintenance that Maya provided included establishing daily routines and achievement recognition systems that preserved psychological stability while maintaining hope for eventual rescue. Her leadership approach balanced military discipline with civilian emotional needs, creating group cohesion that sustained motivation and cooperation during the most challenging survival conditions. Maya's strategic planning included developing contingency procedures for various scenarios that could affect group survival, including additional seismic activity, severe weather conditions, and extended rescue delays that might require relocating to alternative survival sites. Her planning methodology reflected military operational procedures that emphasized preparation for multiple possible outcomes, while maintaining flexibility for adapting to changing circumstances. The demonstration of Maya's military competence during the critical survival period provided undeniable evidence of the value of veteran expertise that her colleagues had consistently dismissed as irrelevant role-playing. Every survival technique, leadership decision, and crisis management procedure that kept the group alive reflected training and experience that civilian education and corporate development programs could never replicate. Maya's transformation from marginalized employee to essential leader occurred through practical demonstration of capabilities that her Preston and Associates colleagues had mocked but now depended upon for their survival. The woman whose military authenticity had been questioned was proving that her service record represented genuine expertise that could mean the difference between life and death when civilian systems and assumptions proved inadequate for real crisis management. The rescue helicopter appeared on the horizon at 14:30 hours on the fourth day after the earthquake, its distinctive military silhouette immediately recognizable to Maya as a UH-60 Black Hawk operated by the Washington Army National Guard's 66th Aviation Regiment. The aircraft approached Cascade Mountain Resort with the methodical precision that characterized military search and rescue operations, circling the disaster site to assess landing conditions and survivor locations before beginning the complex evacuation procedures that would be required to extract 60 people from the mountainous terrain. Maya had been monitoring radio frequencies throughout the morning using emergency communication equipment salvaged from the resort's damaged facilities, maintaining contact schedules that aligned with standard military rescue protocols. When the initial radio transmission crackled through her improvised antenna system, she immediately recognized the professional terminology and communication procedures that indicated genuine military rescue operations rather than civilian emergency services that might lack the specialized capabilities required for mountain disaster response. The helicopter's crew chief established radio contact using military communication protocols that Maya responded to, with the precise terminology and situation reporting procedures that her training required. Black Hawk 7-2, this is Ground Control Alpha. We have 60 souls on site, 15 requiring immediate medical evacuation, with established landing zone coordinates and prepared casualty reports. Request priority medical team deployment for serious trauma cases. The response from the aircraft confirmed Maya's assessment that professional military rescue operations had finally reached their location after 4 days of isolation and survival challenges that had tested every aspect of her crisis management capabilities. Ground Control Alpha, Black Hawk 7-2 acknowledges 60 souls, 15 priority medical. We have flight medic and trauma team aboard. Identify ground commander for coordination briefing. Maya's identification as ground commander generated immediate recognition from the military rescue crew, whose personnel records indicated her service history and current civilian employment status. The revelation that a decorated Army Ranger veteran had been present at the disaster site and had assumed leadership of survival operations provided validation of her military expertise that would finally silence the skepticism and dismissal she had endured from civilian colleagues. The helicopter's landing procedures required Maya to coordinate ground support activities that demonstrated her familiarity with military aviation operations and emergency response protocols. She directed Preston Associates personnel in establishing perimeter security around the landing zone, organizing casualty evacuation priorities, and implementing safety procedures that protected both survivors and rescue personnel during the complex extraction process. The flight medic who emerged from the Black Hawk was Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a veteran of multiple combat deployments who immediately recognized Maya's military bearing and professional competence in managing the disaster response. Their initial medical briefing occurred using standard military casualty reporting procedures that civilian emergency services would never have understood, but which provided precise information about patient conditions and treatment requirements. "Colonel, your casualty reports and triage procedures are textbook perfect," Rodriguez observed while reviewing Maya's medical documentation and treatment records. "How long since you rotated back from deployment? Your field medicine protocols are current with latest combat medical standards, and your improvised equipment shows serious expertise in trauma management under field conditions." The revelation of Maya's military rank and combat experience spread rapidly among the rescue personnel, whose respect for veteran expertise contrasted sharply with the skepticism and dismissal that Maya had experienced from her civilian colleagues. The military rescue team immediately deferred to her ground command authority and incorporated her situation assessment into their evacuation planning with the professional courtesy that characterized interactions between military personnel. The evacuation procedures that followed demonstrated the seamless coordination between Maya's ground operations and the military rescue team's extraction capabilities, reflecting shared training and communication protocols that enabled efficient casualty processing and survivor evacuation. Her organization of personnel and resources had anticipated military rescue requirements, positioning patients and equipment for optimal helicopter access and medical team deployment. Brad Morrison's evacuation required specialized medical equipment and procedures that the military flight medic implemented with Maya's assistance, utilizing her detailed knowledge of his condition and treatment history to ensure continuity of care during transport to regional trauma facilities. The collaboration between Maya and the military medical team demonstrated the professional competence that her civilian colleagues had questioned for 8 months. Jessica Winter's compound fracture evacuation benefited from Maya's improvised splinting and pain management procedures that had prevented complications and maintained patient stability throughout the 4-day survival period. The military medical assessment confirmed that Maya's field treatment had been appropriate and effective, preventing tissue damage and infection that could have resulted in permanent disability or limb loss. The psychological evaluation of Preston and Associates personnel revealed the dramatic difference between military and civilian responses to prolonged crisis situations, with Maya demonstrating stress tolerance and leadership effectiveness that exceeded professional standards, while her colleagues exhibited various degrees of acute stress reactions and psychological trauma that required ongoing therapeutic intervention. David Richardson's interaction with the military rescue personnel provided a stark demonstration of how civilian leadership authority was viewed within military culture, where competence and experience determined respect rather than corporate hierarchy and administrative position. The rescue team's deference to Maya's ground command while treating Richardson as a civilian casualty requiring assistance highlighted the institutional recognition of veteran expertise that civilian workplaces typically failed to acknowledge. The documentation procedures that the military rescue team followed included detailed incident reports that would become part of the official disaster response record, with Maya's leadership and crisis management effectiveness formally recognized through military channels that understood the significance of her achievements under extreme circumstances. The official documentation would provide external validation of her military expertise that her civilian colleagues could no longer question or dismiss. The helicopter's commanding officer, Major Jennifer Chen, had reviewed Maya's military service record during the flight to the disaster site and approached her with the professional recognition that veteran achievements deserved within military culture. Colonel Kellerman, your service record indicates 3 combat deployments with the 75th Rangers and decorations for valor under fire. On behalf of the Washington Army National Guard, I want to express our appreciation for your leadership during this disaster response. The formal military courtesy that Major Chen demonstrated included the traditional salute that acknowledged Maya's rank and service achievements, a gesture that provided public recognition of her military status in front of Preston and Associates colleagues who had spent months questioning her authenticity. The salute represented institutional validation that transcended civilian skepticism and acknowledged the genuine nature of her military experience and expertise. The impact of witnessing an active-duty military officer saluting Maya was profound. For Preston and Associates personnel who had consistently dismissed her military background as elaborate role-playing and attention-seeking behavior, the formal military recognition provided undeniable evidence of her authentic service record and combat experience that civilian employment verification processes had failed to communicate effectively. Tyler Chen's evacuation included medical treatment for traumatic brain injury that required specialized neurological assessment and intervention, with Maya's field diagnosis and treatment procedures proving accurate and appropriate, according to military medical standards. The rescue team's evaluation confirmed that her improvised medical care had prevented complications and maintained patient stability during the critical initial treatment period. The resource management assessment that the military rescue team conducted revealed the exceptional effectiveness of Maya's logistics coordination and supply allocation during the 4-day survival period, with personnel and equipment utilization exceeding professional emergency management standards. Despite the challenging conditions and limited resources available at the disaster site, the evacuation completion required multiple helicopter flights to transport all 60 survivors to appropriate medical facilities and temporary housing locations, with Maya coordinating ground operations throughout the extended extraction process that demonstrated her sustained competence under prolonged stress conditions that would have overwhelmed civilian emergency coordinators. The final helicopter departure included Maya among the last evacuees, reflecting her military tradition of ensuring that all personnel under her command were safely evacuated before abandoning her leadership position. Her adherence to military protocols and professional standards provided a final demonstration of the authentic military culture that her colleagues had consistently dismissed as performance art rather than genuine service commitment. 6 months later, Maya stood before a packed auditorium at the National Emergency Management Conference in Washington, D.C., wearing her dress uniform adorned with ribbons that told the story of her distinguished military service. The audience included emergency responders, corporate executives, and government officials who had come to hear about the Cascade Mountain Rescue that had redefined disaster preparedness protocols across multiple industries. Preston and Associates had undergone complete organizational transformation following the earthquake incident. David Richardson had been reassigned to a lower position, while Maya was promoted to Director of Crisis Management and Employee Safety, with authority to implement veteran hiring initiatives and emergency preparedness training programs throughout the company's operations. Jessica Winters, her arm fully healed, had become one of Maya's strongest advocates within the corporate culture, using her social influence to promote veteran employment and military expertise recognition. The same woman who had mocked Maya's tattoos now wore a small military support pin and regularly spoke about the importance of respecting veteran experience in civilian workplaces. The company's new emergency protocols, developed under Maya's leadership, had become industry standards that were being adopted by corporations nationwide. Her integration of military training with civilian emergency planning had proven so effective that the Department of Homeland Security had contracted Preston and Associates to develop federal guidelines for corporate disaster preparedness. Maya's final slide showed a photograph of the military salute that had validated her service in front of colleagues who had doubted her authenticity. Sometimes the person you underestimate is exactly the person you need, she concluded to thunderous applause. The woman they had called a fake soldier had become the expert, who was teaching the nation how to survive when everything else failed. What incredible story of hidden strength and ultimate vindication would you like to hear next? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of overlooked heroes who prove that respect is earned through action, not assumptions.